everybody. My name is Haley. I'm here from ProWritingAid, and thank you so much for joining us at another session in the ProWritingAid series for writers. My guest today is Sacha Black. Sacha is an author, rebel podcaster, and speaker who loves writing books about people with magical powers and other books about the art of writing. When she's not writing, she can be found laughing inappropriately loud, sniffing musty old books, sniffling while she reads musty old books, fangirling film and TV soundtracks, or thinking up new ways to break the rules. She lives in Cambridgeshire, England, with her wife and her genius giant of a son. Sacha, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. I am shocked at how many people are in the comments. So yes, guys, thank you so much. I'm going to jump straight in. I just have to hit play from start and we will begin the session. So this is how to breathe life into your prose. And first of all, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself for those people who may not know or have heard of me or seen any of my books. So yes, my name is Sacha Black. I write non-fiction writing craft books that help writers to improve all kinds of things from prose, description, your characters, so villains and heroes. I've recently co-written a couple of books with Jay Thorne, 9 Things Career Authors Don't Do series. The first one was on rebel mindset, which is very much in the theme of my podcast. And the other one was on finance for authors who would like to go full-time. So I also write fantasy books. I've got 2 books out in my young adult series, and then I have the 3rd one and the 4th one actually coming out back to back in the new year. I also run 2 podcasts. The Rebel Author podcast is my main podcast, and that comes out weekly on Wednesdays. Almost forgot there. And I interview lots of amazing people from our industry and also other industries. So sometimes I talk to entrepreneurs, sometimes I talk to all kinds of people, and I try to extract lessons for creatives who want to both improve their writing, their marketing, their publishing, and yeah, business, all that kind of good stuff in order to become full-time writers. The other podcast I co-host with Daniel Wilcox, and that's called Next Level Authors, and it's a complete expose of us as we challenge each other to try and improve our businesses and take our author careers to the next level. So yeah, okay, let's get into the content then. So what are we going to cover? Well, we're going to look at 3 of what I think are some of the most important pillars of improving your prose. So the first one is looking at description. We'll go through how to tighten your prose. We'll look at juxtapositions and also working with the intangible. I'll go into all of the detail shortly. Next, we'll look at characterization, differentiation in particular, so how to prevent yourself from having characters that all end up looking like or reading like cardboard cutouts. We'll look at how theme and character interact, and personality impact, and also consistency. Last but by no means least, we will look at dialogue differentiation. We'll go into a character's voice and their personality. We'll look at a comfort zone word bag. I had to practice saying that because I definitely stumbled over it earlier. And then we'll also look at sentence construction. All right, so juxtapositions. The first thing that you guys need to know is that juxtapositions are awesome. They absolutely rock when it comes to improving your writing and improving your prose. So what is a juxtaposition? A juxtaposition occurs when you place 2 things close together or side by side for the purpose of comparison or contrast. And typically these things are going to be complete opposites. So what do they do and why do they work? Well, they create metaphors and similes, and they draw the reader in through really sharp imagery. When you place 2 opposing things next to each other, it creates such a sharp, stark image that your readers can't help but create images in their minds. And that brings depth to both your work and your story. Juxtapositions, I think, are a bit like, I guess they're like a representation of story as a whole. Why is that? Well, because they create conflict themselves, and they represent, you know, your protagonist who has their arc, and in the beginning they're flawed, at the end they are healed, they are recovered, they are a full character. So they represent all of the same things that your story do. It's like a macro juxtaposition in itself. That's what story is. And although juxtapositions should, you know, in theory create disparity, they actually create harmony, and that's why they work. I'm just going to have a quick sip of juice, sorry. Right, so we're looking at macro juxtapositions and micro juxtapositions. So macro juxtapositions are what I was talking about, your story as a whole. Your story is a juxtaposition. It starts in your hero's normal world. There's a problem, so they start completely flawed. They end healed and not flawed, and therefore you're pitting those two conflicting things against each other. And I think because story is a juxtaposition in itself, that's why using juxtapositions in your description works so well as well. So you can then have juxtapositions between characters. Your hero and your villain is a juxtaposition in itself, but then you can do it with your side characters as well. So let's say you have a theme of sacrifice in your book. You can have one character representing one element of sacrifice and another character representing a different element, and you can pit those two against each other. And then on the micro level, you can have juxtapositions at the sentence level, looking at your description. And I like to use really current examples, and I have been reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, that's easy for me to say, this week by V.E. Schwab, and oh, it's beautiful, and there are some wonderful juxtapositions in there. So this is one which I'm going to read. Her father's work is beautiful, the wood smooth where his hands are rough, delicate where he is large. So if we look at the detail of this, then we have smooth where his hands are rough. So smooth and rough are complete opposites. They are pitting two very contrasting concepts against each other. And that's why, like, it creates such this beautiful image in my mind. And again, delicate and large, very different concepts, very different descriptors, and yet putting them all together creates this gorgeous imagery in my mind of, you know, sort of a middle-aged man with giant hands, and just, you know, creating this beautiful, detailed, intricate sculpture made out of wood. So yes, juxtapositions, they're awesome. You should use them. All right, the intangible tangible. I love this concept. I get really excited and nerd out about it. So one of the main principles of description is to make unrelatable, difficult or complex concepts, emotions, or, you know, things in your novel completely and utterly relatable and understandable to your reader. So we need to, as writers, take these intangible, layered emotions that are very difficult. You know, how do you explain when you feel both sadness and relief when somebody passes? You know, these are very complicated emotions, but we have to take them and make them relatable and understandable to our readers. One easy way to do that is to convert something intangible into something tangible. And actually, you can do it the other way round as well, but I'm biased. My favorite is taking something intangible and turning it into the tangible. So what do I mean by intangible things? I mean concepts like time, like love, hope, kindness, loss, ideas, information. And then making those things that you can't touch, you can't, you know, hold in your hands, completely understandable in a unique way to the reader. So let's look at some examples. And again, these are from Addie LaRue because I'm reading the book this week. Okay, so the first one is, and there will be a moment, brief as a yawn, where she won't know where she is. So the intangible thing in this sentence is a moment. It is time, and it's highly relevant to the story, but a moment is time. You can't hold a moment. You can't capture it between your fingers. So what she does is she takes that moment and she compares it to yawning. which everybody knows how quick a yawn is, or sometimes they're really long and juicy yawns, but you know, for the most part, a yawn is quite quick. And comparing that and giving the intangible moment a yawn helps to really bring it to life and make it real. It's something we know, we've all experienced it. And again, the second example, also about time, but it says, she lies there perfectly still, tries to hold time like a breath in her chest. Oh, I love it. It's amazing. What a line of description. It's absolutely gorgeous. So she is taking time, which again, completely intangible, and she is making us feel that intangible concept by, you know, I'm sure everybody has held a breath and they know what that pressure is like in their chest. So when you give the intangible something tangible as a comparison, or you pull it and give it these descriptors, you make it completely relatable, and you make your readers connect with your protagonist and with your narrator because they've experienced those things as well. So yeah, this is one good trick. Right, where am I? Okay. So looking at tightening prose, I'm sure you all know that you've all heard the famous quote, I think it was Stephen King, "The road to hell is paved with adverbs," but nobody really talks about why they're bad. And of course, there are always ways and reasons to break rules. Terry Pratchett used to use a lot of adverbs, but he was using them to create humor, and that's actually quite a common technique for comedy writers. But anyway, typically, adverbs are bad, and they get a bad rep because they tell the reader rather than showing the reader. So they are linked to telling. And typically what you're doing when you use an adverb is that you are telling the reader the action that your character is doing rather than showing them in through the action. Okay, so let's look at another example. Right, so it says, she placed the glass firmly on the table. And obviously firmly is the adverb. I mean, it's an okay sentence. Nobody's going to cry about this sentence, but we can make it better. So what happens when you remove the word firmly? She placed the glass on the table. Well, you don't actually lose any meaning by removing that word. And in fact, you've tightened up the sentence because there's less words. But I think arguably we lose a bit of the sense of the intensity of the action. So what you need to do is, instead of using the adverb, you choose a better verb, you choose a stronger verb. So in this example, I said, she slammed the glass on the table. Okay, well, that's good. We have a tighter sentence, we have a more impactful sentence, we have action that is clearer. I think slammed is far clearer than firmly. But we can take it a step further. One of the tricks that I love when I've used an adverb and I need to take it out is to give my action a consequence. So she slammed the glass on the table. Whiskey sloshed over the slide and splashed her hand. So when you give a consequence, you are opening up your character for conflict. That has obviously created conflict. She's probably going to be annoyed. I nearly said a naughty word then. She's probably going to be annoyed that she's spilt whiskey, and therefore you are creating conflict and tension in both your sentences and your story and your scene. So that is one quick way to fix the overuse of adverbs. Right. Filtering. What is filtering? This is like always my number one tip for anybody who wants to improve their prose. I cannot tell you the number of manuscripts I have edited where people filter, and it's super natural. We all do it. I did it before I learned about filtering. So what is filtering? Filtering is when you, the author, add in unnecessary narration, causing the reader to be removed one step from the character. So what on earth does that mean? Well, let me tell you. When you write, regardless of the point of view that you are writing in, you should enable your reader to be inside your protagonist or narrator's head. So, and that's regardless of the point of view. Your reader should always be seeing the action through their eyes, something that I like to call the hero lens, but we'll go into that later. When you add in filter words, you are removing the reader from the character's head, and they are, in a sense, standing next to the protagonist, watching them do the action. So, whoa, that went a bit fast. Where did we go here? Oh, I'm laughing at myself now. Hey, look, you're getting the sound effects, guys. So yes, right. So words, filter words include things like heard, saw, felt. You know, specifically, I heard, she saw, he felt, he thought. Okay, so let's look at that in action. Now we're on the right slide. So let's look at a sentence with filtering. So the sentence goes, I heard an owl hooting in the trees, and a moment later, I saw the canopy leaves rustle as if replying. So I've highlighted in black the filter words, and let's have a look at the sentence without the filter words. An owl hooted in the trees, and a moment later, the canopy leaves rustled as if replying. So actually, the sentences are almost the same, but what we've done is we've made the action more immediate in the sentence without filtering, because we've removed that step, that extra distance that we put in place as authors when we use phrases like I heard, she felt, he thought, etc. So yeah, super quick way. And also, if you're like close to a word count and you need to get it under or something, this is such a good way to hack out words from your manuscript if you need to cut down on your word count. Right, repetition. This is my personal pet hate. I hate repetition. But when people talk about repetition, what they typically talk about is crutch words. So words like eyes, back, look, hands. Really should have put a thing on here. Maybe anyway, yeah, sorry about that. I try to pull them out of my head. So yes, crutch words. Everybody has them. I have them. You have them. We all have them. It's fine. Amazing software like ProWritingAid will help you to find your crutch words and delete them. So yeah, props to ProWritingAid. Love it. So yes, let's look at all of the many varied ways that repetition can crop up in our novel. So when you have sentences that convey the same information, but they're just written differently. So for example, if you are describing a character and the character's clothes, and you have two different sentences describing the top, you don't need to do it once, do it effectively, do it efficiently, and you won't have to have the repetition. What else? Repeated descriptive sentences, phrases, or parts of description that sound similar despite using different words, or also repeated words used in a different context. So what do I mean by this? Well, for example, the word humming or hummed. So humming and hummed, they are different words technically, but they're, you know, derived from the same word. So you can look to remove that. Also, when you then put that into the context of your description, so the bee hummed, the car hummed, it's repetition. And the thing is, the more unusual of the word that you are using, the more noticeable it is to a reader. So for example, I remember reading in a book recently, they were talking about aphasia, which I think is something on a building. I'm not an architect, so anyway, and because the word came up a couple of times in the book, I noticed it and I felt the repetition. So yeah, it's really important that you try and pick up where you've used the same word in a different context. What else? Slightly less about the prose, but more about the overall story is multiple characters with similar traits or personalities. So, you know, if you have two divas in your story, or if you have, you know, two archetypes also, and that sort of goes into the next one. So multiple characters performing the same functions, such as two mentors. Like, nobody's saying you can't have two mentors, but a more effective way to have multiple characters with the same function or archetype would be to have them conflicting. So if you have your theme, which could be anything, I'm not going to go into theme, but if you have a theme and you have one mentor on one side of the moral line and another mentor on a different side of the line, that's not repetition. If you've got two mentors both basically doing the same thing, kill one of your darlings. It's repetitive. We don't need it. It's a waste of words. What else? Multiple paragraphs, scenes, or chapters establishing the same plot point, the same description. Just do it once, do it effectively, and don't do it again. That is like my ethos when it comes to description. Right, characters with similar names or similar sounding names. So if you have a Terry and a Tony, or you have a Richard and a, wait, no, I can't do that one. If you have a Terry and a Tony, or a Marissa and a Melissa, your readers are going to get confused. Now, another thing that tends to happen, not only with like similar sounding names, but is also names that start with the same letter. We all have biases, me included, because when I did this in my own novel, I was mortified that I had loads of characters start with names that started with the same letter. Like, you don't see it when you're writing, so it's really important that like you create your own list so that you can see where that's the case, and it just helps keep your writing really clear and your story clear for your readers as well. Okay, next one, unintentionally using different words to describe the same thing. So for example, if you're trying to describe temperature and you describe heat with warm, hot, molten, lava, sweaty, whatever. Yeah, just again, story of this slide, say it once, say it well, move right on. Oh yes, right, and one of my favorite ones is to check your scene openings and your scene closings. Now, this one's really tricky unless you genuinely go through and skim the first line or two of every single of your scene and skim the closing line of every single one of your scenes. You don't notice it because there's so much time that elapses between just reading each of your scenes that you can easily put repetition into the beginning. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I will tell you after I've had a drink. What I mean by that is that you could, there are only so many ways you can open a chapter. So you can open a chapter with dialogue, you could open a chapter with description, you could open a chapter with a question, you could open it with thought, with action. Now, you know, if you have 4 scenes back to back that open with dialogue, it's repetitive. So you need to like make sure you're varying both the opening and the closing of your scenes, and making sure you haven't got too many scenes in succession, opening and closing in the same way. What am I doing? I nearly stopped the screen share then. All right, character voice. Okay, so I love talking about voice because everybody always talks about it like it's the holy grail of writing, and it's this really complex, complicated thing, and I really don't think it is. What I do think people get confused with is the difference between character voice and character voice and author voice. Look at me, I'm getting it wrong when I speak. So let's just quickly talk about author voice. So author voice can change. That's usually like taken with a bit of a gasp of breath, but I'm not really sure why. You only have to look at famous authors like Stephen King, for example. He's written fantasy, he's written horror, he's written short stories, and his voice, his tone in all of those is different. Look at J.K. Rowling. Okay, I know she's not the most popular writer at the moment, but you only need to look at Harry Potter versus the Comma and Strike, I think it's called, books, to see how wildly different her voice is in those two genres and those two sets of books. Now, character voice, though, doesn't change. Why? Well, because a character's voice is their personality. It is the embodiment of them. So the only time, even though your character will change over the course of your book in terms of their arc and their flaw, their voice, their individual personality shouldn't change. What am I trying to say? Yes, so a character's voice is made up of 4 elements, and this is what I call the hero lens. So I like to think of character voice in terms of like rose-tinted spectacles, but like hero-tinted spectacles. And so their spectacles are made up of actions, of thoughts, dialogue, and feelings. So each of those elements creates part of this lens and should be impacting the character at the sentence level, which we'll go into a bit more detail about this in a second. Okay, so let's pretend that 2 characters are at the same parade. And this is an example that I have in my book, 10 Steps to Hero, How to Craft a Kick-Ass Protagonist. And I'm looking at trying to embody different characters on the page and allowing their hero lens and their unique personality traits, their unique feelings, their viewpoints on the world, their experiences affect their word choice. Your character's personality should be affecting the word choice. It should be affecting the way they see things, the way they choose to describe things. So let's pretend these two characters are at exactly the same parade. I'm going to read the two examples and we'll see the difference. So, character 1. The villagers weave through the streets, brandishing placards like rifles. Their soldiers marching into their last battle. The war drum beat of their feet grinds into my ears, rattling my teeth and making my blood boil. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about them until I've read the second one. So, character 2. They move like a current, each person flowing past the next, supposedly united in their cause. But as they chant and sing for solidarity, it sounds like the melody of mourners. I see the tiny fractures, the gaps they leave between each other, the scattered looks, the fear of isolation. Each of them is drowning in a swelling crowd, and yet, despite the mass of bodies, they're all fighting alone. So hopefully, you guys can see a very big difference between the two parades the one parade that these two characters are describing. So character 1 then uses short, sharp, what are these things that I'm talking about? Words, Sacha, they're words. So the character 1 uses short, sharp words. They use very aggressive words like battle, grinds, beat, drum, war, blood, boil even. These words are shorter words, they're angry words, and that's really what I was trying to convey in this example, that this character is an aggressive, angry type person. And because of their personality, I chose words that embody their personality to affect and influence the way they describe things. And this is how you get differentiation. You really truly allow their personality to influence everything from story plot to the decisions and choices they're making and how they react to the obstacles, right the way down to the dialogue and the description. So then in the second character, this character is much more melancholy. It's a sad, possibly even depressed character. They're using longer words and even longer sentences. They use more words to describe the same event. So words like mourners, scattered, fractures, isolation, fear, drowning, alone. These words all chosen together because this person is so melancholy and low. So yeah, I hope that's a really clear example of letting your character influence your description. I hope I'm not going too fast. I can't see any comments, so I have no idea if I'm going fast or not. Sorry, guys.
Oh, it's going great.
I forgot there was someone listening. Oh. Okay, right. Characters are theme. Now, this might be obvious for your hero. Everybody knows that your hero ought to embody your theme. A lot of people forget, though, that your villain should embody the opposite or the anti-theme. And I'll give you an example of this in a second. But what so many people do is they then forget that you have a whole raft of side characters that also should be representing the theme in some way, shape, or form. And ideally, they should all be representing a different element or aspect of that theme, or even like a different question based on that theme. So one of my favorite examples of this, because it's so textbook, like it's such a good example. And actually, if you want a really good example of how theme influences story, watch Disney films and Pixar. They are spectacular. Kids' films are just the best at showing you how to draw theme and like the web of connectivity throughout a story. Right, so where was I? Katniss, President Snow, Rue and Peter. So the Hunger Games. Very broadly, speaking, the Hunger Games' theme is sacrifice. Now, Katniss is a true embodiment of sacrifice. Right in the first chapter, the early chapters, she has to, or she doesn't have to, but she chooses to sacrifice herself in order to save and protect her sister. So she has a flat character arc. She doesn't change throughout the series, but she creates change in her world. So that's the arc that happens in the Hunger Games. So, but every other character, and this is what Suzanne Collins does so well, every other character is a different look at sacrifice, a different play on sacrifice. So you have President Snow. Katniss sacrifices herself to save others. President Snow sacrifices others to save himself. So they are direct polar opposites. But Rue and Peter and all the other characters, they are also a different play on theme. So Rue appears and Katniss has the opportunity to kill her, to sacrifice her, to save herself. She doesn't do it. And in exchange, Rue then ends up dying and saving Katniss from the killer bees, wasps, whatever it was, I can't remember now. So again, that's a different play. Peter gets sick and makes Katniss face another question. How much is she willing to sacrifice? Is she willing to sacrifice herself again to go and get the medicine for Peter? So Suzanne Collins, like, it's a great book to go and deconstruct and, you know, commit sacrilege and write notes in the corner. Is that just me? Does that anyone else? Or, yeah, moving on. Yeah, so look at the Hunger Games, go study it. It's a fantastic play on how to let theme filter all the way down through all the dialogue, the characters, and right into the description. Rightio, consistency versus spontaneity. Right, humans, we are super habitual creatures. We don't really like change. We form habits. We do the same stuff over and over again. And that's based on our traits, and our traits create consistency. This is good. This is what we need. We need our characters to be consistent. That's how you get real depth, real characters on the page. But there is a but. In order to avoid repetition, you need to show your character's consistency in a variety of different ways. So let's say your character's brave. Yes, your character can save somebody, but how can you show that bravery in different ways? Maybe it's being brave in a class. Maybe it's then being brave by sending a text. Maybe your character chooses brave words to describe things. Maybe they are a little controversial when they are describing scenes, and controversial in their speak because they're being brave. You know, so you have to think about how these personality traits can be shown consistently, but in different ways, and all the way down through to your description. And the other point is when you do that and your character then changes at the end, and they then, you know, fulfill their destiny and stop being flawed, it then creates a bigger, my words are going, it creates a bigger, like, conflict, like a bigger difference between the person that they were and the person they are at the end of the book. Okay, let's move on before I lose any more words. Right, dialogue. This is another very quick way to improve your prose. Dialogue, Jay Thorne recently coined the word monomouth, which I absolutely love. Jay Thorne's an indie author in the community, and he's talking about something called monomouth, and I just think that's brilliant. And it's when all of your characters sound the same. So if you stripped out all of your prose and your narration and you only had dialogue, would you actually be able to tell the difference between your characters? I'm going to bet for anybody that hasn't worked on their dialogue, probably not. And I know in my first drafts, yeah, I have monomouth too. I have to edit in better dialogue. But I had a bit of an epiphany when I was reading Gabriela Pereira's DIY MFA book. And I absolutely love this quote of hers. So it says, dialogue is communication between characters, not communication between the writer and the reader. Do not confuse the two. And oh my goodness me, my brain just exploded, because so much of writing our books is about us and our, you know, our work of art and our masterpiece. It's our baby. You know, we are pouring blood onto the page, and actually it's not about us. It's about our characters. So I love this. Make it all about the characters. Yes, so this really changed my view, and actually we need to get out of the way of our characters to let them just get on with it and talk in their voice, in their personality. So let's look at this in more detail. Right, so I mentioned at the start of this lecture, webinar, this thing, that a character's personality is their voice. It's also their dialogue, right? Because dialogue is voice. I'm talking, this is my voice. You can hear me talking, obviously, to the screen. Anyway, so how can you let that influence and affect your prose? Well, you need to ask yourself, how do their professions, how do their personality traits, how do their flaws, their wounds, their personal history, what experiences have they had, what, social settings have they been in that would have an impact or an effect on the way that they are talking? I am British. I sound British. I also sound a bit sarcastic because I'm a sarcastic person. So, that affects the word choices I make. Also I'm super sweary. So normally I'm like dropping swear words in or left, right and center, and I'm being super professional. I'm not swearing today. So, that's how that affects my voice because I'm cheeky and a rebel. But, you need to think about this in terms of your characters. What of their background and history, and personality traits can you put into the sentence level, into their dialogue? Yeah, okay, let's move on. Let's look at an example. Okay, so I'm probably going to embarrass myself now with doing this, but okay, so example 1. Nah, mate, I ain't sitting here chatting more poo with you. Sorry, I forgot. Actually, I did leave one naughty word in this. I apologize if I have offended anyone. I hope I haven't. Example 2 then is, it's not pertinent to discuss the matter further. So you can see they're both saying the same thing. They don't want to talk about this anymore. The conversation's over, it's done, right? But both of those bits of dialogue is completely different. They don't sound like the same person. In my head, I had a professor in example 2 and a sort of gang member type person in the first example. Now, what do the words in these bits of dialogue say about the characters? Well, okay, we could probably stereotype and say, the second one uses longer words, it uses more complicated words, therefore perhaps they have more education than the first person. Don't know. Well, I do know because I chose them, but the fact of the matter is they're using words like pertinent, matter, discuss. These are all sort of academic type sounding words. Therefore, a professor is likely to use those words. In the second one, we've got ends of words dropped. It sounds a bit Cockney, London, or gang-ish. Nah, mate. That's, a professor wouldn't say that. So you can see that, the words are shorter as well. And so I have allowed these characters to talk in the same, and what am I trying to say? These characters' traits, history, social settings, and life experiences, I've allowed that to affect the dialogue and the way that I'm crafting that. Now, the only thing that I would say is when you do put accents into dialogue, it can be quite an exhausting process as a writer because you do need to make sure you do that throughout the book. And I'm sure that sounds like it's really obvious, but I just got through judging a competition, quite prestigious competition, and there were books where accents were used and they were dropped. People drop them typically when there's a longer segment of dialogue because it's harder to keep up, and also as the story progresses, typically writers will drop accented use in their dialogue. So that's something for you to check if you are using accents. Have a look at your longer passages to make sure you're still embodying that accent, and also sort of that soggy middle type section. I think we're getting to the end. Right, so the phrase of the evening that I practice saying, comfort zone word bags. Right, what do I mean by that? That nonsense sentence. A comfort zone word bag. You have probably heard me say the following words: right, so, also, possibly awesome. I say awesome a lot. We all have words that we say regularly. Now, I don't recommend that you allow your characters to use words like so, or I also say all the time. Oh, I'm trying to get rid of that. See what I did there? Excuse me. Completely lost my train of thought because I mean, yeah. Hang on a second. Right, yes, word bags. So what you need to do is, for your, let's take the professor example that we had just a slide or two ago. That professor might say, if I was writing a character like a professor, then I would probably draw together like a bundle of words on a page that I could draw from and pick from. Words like in addition, furthermore, suggestive of, prerogative. You know, these are all longer, more complicated words. And I would drop all of these onto a page, a big brainstorm, so that I can keep my character consistent, both in dialogue and in the description. You know, what words are your characters most comfortable saying? And it's really important that we do try and distinguish between different characters and the likely words that they're going to say, because it creates sharper characterization. Other things you can do then to ensure you're differentiating your characters in both dialogue and actually also in descriptions as well, certainly if you have multiple points of view. Sentence length. Do some of your characters use a whole heap of words to describe stuff, like me? Or do they use short, sharp sentences and you know, do some of your characters only use 5 words to every response? These little nuanced decisions that you make will help to really sharpen the edges of your characters and keep them distinct from other characters in your story. Word length, again, we talked a bit about that with the 2 dialogue examples. But again, yes, sentence length, word length, all different nuanced decisions that you can make at the sentence level that help to, you know, sharpen your prose. And then last but by no means least, how do different emotions impact the way that your characters talk? When your character's in love, do they get flustered and jabber on, or do they actually freeze up? You know, do they, and they then can't express themselves? So knowing how your character will react with different emotions will help to create distinctions on the page and in different scenes. And excuse me, also think about things like fight, flight, or freeze. So obviously there's going to be a lot of conflict in your story, or there should be. So how do your characters react normally to conflict, and even in their dialogue? How do they react under pressure when they're stressed, vocally and verbally? Because not everybody reacts the same. Not everybody will shout. Not everybody will just go quiet. So think about how you can have your characters reacting differently, and even choosing, you know, perhaps one will swear when they're angry, one will throw things instead and say no words. You know, all of these things will affect your prose. I have a feeling, yeah, that's it. We're at the end of this. So have you answer questions? Again, if you enjoyed the session, then you can either get more in my books, particularly on the prose one, in the Anatomy of Prose. I have a textbook and workbook. Or you can jump on my course. So my course, just very quickly, is very, very micro niche. So I am going through the whole of the Anatomy of Prose. Eventually I will be creating courses on each of the sections in there, but in order to go deeper and really get into the weeds of developing craft, I have micro niched the topic. So the first course is on the senses, and there'll be more coming, and you can get yourself a 15% discount. Thanks, guys.
Amazing. Yeah, I just dropped the link in there. It's the code ProWritingAid15, and the link is in the chat, and I'll keep dropping it as we go through our Q&A. So that was amazing. If you guys have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom. There are a couple in here that I'm going to get started with, but we have about 15 minutes for questions, so please feel free to drop yours in as well. So first off, Bonnie asks, is prose anything that is not a poem?
Prose is, yeah, I guess so. I mean, prose is anything that you are putting in your book. So to me, prose is description, it's thought, it's dialogue, it's everything that goes in between the pages. It can even be things like, some books will have, I don't have one with me, but like quotes at the top of the page. This is everything, it's your words, essentially, words.
Great. Okay, so Julie has a great question. She says, hi, Regarding accents and dialogue, I have characters in my work who are Scottish and some who are English. I've been recommended not to use dialect for the Scottish characters as it is not grammatically correct and acts as a barrier to the reader. I don't want to make my characters sound different, or I do want to make them sound different, but I don't want to risk losing the reader with non-standard spelling.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And I would say it depends on a couple of things. So what are the expectations in your genre specifically? So for example, you might have some genres, if you're writing like Scottish historical fiction, they're probably going to expect accents in that. If you're writing urban fantasy set in London, they might not expect accents. And, you know, I'm just making this up and giving you examples. So it's really important that you check your genre. One thing that you can do is, if you don't want to do it throughout your story, you can give a nod to an accent. So as a Scottish person, they could say, I don't want to do the accent, but, you know, like I, instead of, you know, they say AYE a lot. So there could be, you could choose like one or two words or phrases that they use and put those a few times through your novel, just to give like a nod to the accent rather than changing every single line of dialogue. And actually, I think that that's a bit of a diamond. Like, I talk about diamonds all the time. You know, I'm much as we all love to wear diamond dresses and be draped and, you know, jewelry and stuff. Actually, diamonds, I think, are really beautiful when they're in isolation or, you know, few and far between. So use it like a diamond in this respect, I would say.
Awesome. Okay, so someone asks, when do you think verbal tics work and when do they not?
I'd like an example of one, I suppose, that they are talking about. A bit like with the Scottish accent, it gets very annoying if it's overused. So for example, in a book I read recently, the protagonist was called a nickname by like 4 different characters, and it was a different nickname by each of these characters, and that got really annoying because it was overused in the dialogue as well. You know, that's an example where actually you don't want to be using people's names in dialogue because it reads cliche and weird. So I would say whatever tick you use it when it's going to have the most impact. So if you've got your character in a scene behaving super like themselves rather than a scene that's just sort of neutral emotionally, that might be a better time to use it than in a scene where there's less conflict or tension. So use it at key moments, and I would say infrequently. You're giving a flavor of this character rather than, you know, when it comes to tics, because otherwise it becomes annoying. I am sure people are irritated with me saying so a million times. I'm trying not to, guys. I'm trying. But yeah, so, you know, like, so it's better to give a flavor always with these things. Quirks, flavors. Yeah,
I know I'm never as aware of my verbal tics as when I'm like talking to a group of people. I'm so sorry. I can't stop it.
I know. As a podcaster, I have become excruciatingly aware of the things that I say, and I do try so hard not to.
I know. Yeah. Whenever I watch myself on webinars that I'm giving or listen to podcasts, I'm like, Haley, stop it. Why? Okay. Lots of great questions coming in. So someone says, I love the idea of a word cloud that suits each character when writing their dialogue. Do you have any advice on the use of dialogue tags?
Yep. Okay. So oh my God, I am going to be like so acutely aware of my tics now. Not tics, sorry, my crutches, I should say. Dialogue tags, right. A dialogue tag should be used only to clarify who is speaking. So if you have a back and forth, you probably don't need to use the dialogue tags all of the time. When a new speaker starts speaking that hasn't been involved in the conversation, you need a dialogue tag. If you're starting a dialogue and you've had narration before, you need a dialogue tag. So that's probably the biggest times when you need it. Other things to say are keep them simple. It gets very irritating. Don't use adverbs as well. Don't use adverbs in dialogue tags because okay, I'm trying to say 8 things and just slow down, Sacha. Adverbs typically are trying to tell the reader the tone of the dialogue. Your dialogue itself should be explicit enough that the reader can infer the tone. So don't use adverb tags. There are two ways to use dialogue tags as well. So you can have Sacha said or said Sacha. Now, there's no right or wrong answer with which way to use them. I have a preference for name first, then tag, so Sacha said. And the reason for that is the purpose of a dialogue tag is to tell the reader who is speaking. So therefore, if you tell the name first, you're doing the job in the most efficient way. The other reason is because typically the said Sacha phrase I see in a lot of like kids fiction, like See Spot Run. I don't know if you guys, it might be very British, but like the you know, sort of the picture books. And so I find it a bit stilted sometimes, but there's always a time and place. Sometimes you have to do said Sacha. So yeah, what else can I tell you about dialogue tags? Try and keep them simple. Try and just use say and said. They are invisible words. The reader will just skim past them. Yeah, is that enough? I can keep going.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so Michelle says prose versus purple prose. Do you think it's okay to go overboard on the prose in your 0 first second draft, and then from your experience, do you end up cutting that in the final draft? Or is it your beta readers or editors that point out your purple prose because you're kind of blind to them?
Okay, so first of all, there are no rules, right? This is about your preferences. This is your book, your baby. You get to write however you want to write. Okay, so if you like purple prose, as long as it is not 6 pages of description, you're probably going to be okay. There should always be a balance on every single page of dialogue, of narration, of action. Okay, so, you know, I sometimes get manuscripts for editing that have 3 pages with no dialogue. Whether or not there's purple prose, the balance is not right of description and all of the other elements of story. What I do, so on the scale of like very clean prose, which you'd find in things like thrillers, psychological thrillers, through to like epic fantasy or literary fiction, to determine where I wanted to be on that scale, I read from all of those genres and I deconstructed description and prose and to see what I felt comfortable with. And I am like just over the line of enjoying slightly more descriptive, slightly more embellished prose than I am on the cleaner side. And I don't care what anybody else thinks. That's what I like. That's how I write. And I want to write more books like that. So from me to you, feel empowered to write the way that you want to write. Now, in terms of purple prose, if you are using 5 words to describe one thing, you've probably been a bit too repetitive. You know, if you're just using 5 words to describe a color red, there's probably a more effective way to do it. So I think the purple prose thing is a bit of a misnomer. It's less about how much description you're using and more about how clean that description is. You can have, and a really good example of this is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. She has such luxurious prose. It is right on the line of being self-indulgent. I adore it. But it is beautiful. She creates gorgeous imagery and there's no waste in her sentences. There is no waste in her description. So I would say I would say as long as you are creating clean and effective and efficient prose, it doesn't matter how, you know, how much description you are using.
Awesome. Okay, we've got time for a few more. So someone says, how thoroughly should I pre-plan characteristics and personalities of people in advance of writing?
There are no rules. You know, some stories I have plotted, some stories I haven't, some stories I've just sat down and started writing. I think as long as by the time you get to the final draft, you have, you know, developed your characters, it doesn't matter. My question back to you is, what process do you use to finish books? Because that's the most important thing. Are you finishing the book? If you're finishing the book, it doesn't matter how you're getting there. Don't listen to anybody else. You get to the end of that book however you need to get to the end of that book. And if you're, you know, doing all of your character work and plot work or whatever before you start, cool, great, fantastic. If you're doing it in your third and fourth draft, cool, fantastic. The important thing is, are you finishing the book? If you're finishing the book, your process works.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. It's such good advice, because I'm one of those people who gets really caught up in process and who's like, oh, but my like candle isn't lit and I don't have my my perfect temperature cozy setting, so, and then I haven't outlined great, so I can't write, you know, and
exactly.
yeah.
It's so many people get caught up in advice, and you know, because there is lots of good advice out there, and there are lots of good books that, you know, have tell you how to plot or how to write into the dark or whatever, and all of those are good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you as a writer. So my question is always, how do you write? What is your process that gets you to the end of that book?
Awesome. Sacha, do you have time for just a couple more?
Sure.
All right, great. Okay, so let me see. I want to get some stuff. Oh, there's one I just had that was great. Oh, so somebody asked, what are your best tips for point of view when there are two central characters in your novel?
What are my tips when there are two central characters?
Yeah, so kind of differentiating between point of view and that type of thing.
So yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think as long as your characters are distinct and distinguished in your head. So one thing you can do is you can have different POVs, not always recommended. Sometimes it's a bit jarring. I read, there's a book by A.G. Howard. Oh, what's it called? It's like a Phantom of the Opera retelling. Anyway, and one character point of view was first person and one was third person. So that's one particular way. Another way is to go through some of the things that I said in here. So thinking about your two characters' hero lenses. How does their flaw or their particular personality trait impact the way that they see things? Think about what is very different about those two characters. How can you distinguish between them? Think about, you know, giving them some particular words that one character says or particular words that the other character says. Think about that comfort zone word bag that I talked about. You know, yeah, so it's all of these things that we've gone through like in the session, and just formalizing and forming that in your head and practicing, I suppose, before you go into that voice, that chapter. If you or writing that book, if you can maybe write a journal entry in their voice or write a letter in their voice, or even write, and this is probably quite a good way to do it, write a conversation between the two and look at how, and don't use any dialogue tags, and give it to somebody else. And if somebody else can tell the difference, like between which one, you know, and really see the distinguishing details between each of these two characters in a dialogue only, you're probably okay.
All right. And okay, I'm going to end on this question. We do have a couple more, but everybody, I'm going to drop Sacha's course into the chat so that you can follow up with her. And there's numerous, you know, as she was mentioning, there are numerous ways that you can continue to connect with her. So the final question will be about research. So someone asked, how do you, what are your favorite methods for researching and kind of getting these different parts of speech down as you have different characters? So for example, a professor and a gang member.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just looking behind me, 1 second. Right, so what I do is I commit sacrilege. When I read, I get sticky tabs. I don't know if you guys can see this. Every single book that I read, I don't read unless I have a pencil and a sticky tab. Now, I know not everybody likes to mark their books. You know, sometimes, you know, people have a notebook by them, but what I do is I go through every single book I read, and when I see something that is excellent or terrible, I will like underline it, and then I will look at that sentence and I will say, okay, well, what tools, techniques, literary devices have they used in that sentence? And therefore, how has that tool or device actually impacted the sentence. So I gave, like in the presentation, I gave some examples of quotes, and that's literally like the juxtaposition. So the Addie LaRue, I am reading with a pencil, and I pulled that example because I was like, oh my gosh, like I underlined that sentence because it called to me. I thought it was beautiful, and therefore there was something about it. And then I try and work out what it is about it that has called me to that sentence. So yeah, I will then look at it, analyze it, write a note in the margin. Sorry if anybody hates writing in books. And then afterwards I tend to collect them, and I will categorize them, and I'll be like, okay, this and usually each writer is very good at like one thing. So in Addie LaRue, she's extremely good at turning the intangible into tangible things. So that's her strength in that book. In this book, she's very good at creating sassy diva characters. In the Hazelwood, I mentioned the Hazelwood before, she has absolutely exquisite character descriptions. So she has this way of describing characters that's super unique. So it is literally about spotting sentences in books, for me anyway, this is how I learn, and then deconstructing what they have done, comma by comma, word by word, you know, phrase by phrase, looking at things like the rhythm in the sentence, the punctuation, word choice, and how that connects to theme. Like, I know it's forensic and I know it's a lot of detail, but this is, and this is only one way to learn. You know, you have to think about how you learn best, and if that's not the way you learn, don't do it like that. Do it the way that you learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so helpful. Hopefully we'll be able to have you come back and talk to us more, because I know there are just so many amazing things that you can talk to our audience about. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time. For everyone who has come, I'm dropping a couple times in the chat Sacha's course, The Anatomy of Prose, and she's been generous enough to offer a 15% off discount using the code ProWritingAid15. So please check that out. And Sacha, again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful, and everyone's learned so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for the lovely questions and for, you know, playing along with me and listening.
Oh, and just quickly, some people have asked about your website. If you have just like your general website, is that just sachablack.com?
Yeah, sachablack.co.uk.
Yes. .co.uk. So Sacha Black, Sacha with a C.co.uk if you would like to connect with her. And again, I'm dropping this in the chat. We'll send out with the replay, and we'll send all of those notes to you guys as well. So you'll get them in your email after.
The other way that people might want to connect is to join my Facebook group, which if you go onto Facebook and you search for Rebel Authors, you will find our Facebook group. So yeah,
in the chat, Rebel Author Facebook group. Looks like we've got some fans in the
yeah,
chat.
you have got some people from the group here. Yeah.
All right, well, we will see you in the group hopefully then, everyone, and thank you again, Sacha. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Bye.